Max's moves against Lando have led to FIA intervention, Mercedes reveals future development plans after Austin upgrades, and Ferrari's new flexi wing has been tipped as the main reason for the team's dominant win. Do consider subscribing to the channel. Let's get straight into the latest F1 news. With F1 reverting back to its usual format for Mexico this weekend, Friday's schedule has been altered to allow for F1 2025 preparations. With several of the final races of this year using the sprint format, this weekend's Grand Prix in Mexico City uses the standard format, but will still see an alteration to the schedule as preparations for F1 2025 ramp up. This weekend's race takes place at the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez in Mexico City, with the teams set to use the C3, C4, and C5 compounds, as Pirelli is bringing a step softer compounds for this year's race. But, with an eye looking ahead to F1 2025, the opening day of practice will see the teams set loose on the Autodromo for a longer 90-minute second practice session, with FP2 being dedicated to validating the new soft compounds in Pirelli's range. These will be the C4, C5, and C6 compounds, which will be utilized throughout the in-competition test. This sees the practice session become a dedicated test, with all the drivers required to follow a specific program outlined by Pirelli engineers, rather than the teams. Aside from the usual tire allocation of 12 sets for the Grand Prix weekend, each driver will be given 2 additional sets of tires, one an additional compound from the existing range as a baseline reference, and another being from the F1 2025 prototype range, differing in construction and compound from its 2024 counterpart. These 2 sets will be identifiable as they will run without the usual sidewall markings. Pirelli has confirmed the program will consist of a performance run and a long run, and every team will run the same number of laps with equal levels of fuel on board. However, an added complication is that several teams are running with junior drivers in FP1 in order to conform with the FIA's requirement that each team hands over 2 sessions throughout the year to a rookie. With Mexico being one of the final opportunities of the year, several teams are doing so, and as a result, the regular race drivers climbing back into their cars for the FP2 test will be allowed to break away from Pirelli testing after 60 minutes in order to resume their usual data gathering. These drivers will be given an additional set of medium compound tires for this 30-minute portion. Following on from the day's action, Pirelli will verify its data in order to fine-tune the F1 2025 tire range ahead of the big group test in Abu Dhabi following the final race of the year. In FP1, several teams are already confirmed as handing over a car to a junior driver. Felipe Drugovich will drive Fernando Alonso's Aston Martin, Ollie Behrman will be behind the wheel of Charles Leclerc's Ferrari, Robert Schwartzman drives Joe Guanayu's Sauber, and IndyCar star and local hero Patricio O'Ward will drive for McLaren. Mercedes' Andrew Shovlin has confirmed the W15 is pretty much at the end of its development path following its United States Grand Prix upgrades. Mercedes showed up with a big upgrade package for the W15 at the Circuit of the Americas, including a revised front wing flap, upper wishbones, side pod inlet, rear cooling exits, and a new floor geometry. Austin was the 6th last race of the season, meaning it's the time of year when teams have to weigh up whether or not to continue development of their current car or switch focus entirely to the following year's car. This is down to the allocation of resources within a team, whether personnel or financial, given the restrictions of the budget cap. For Mercedes, that point of moving on has been reached, with trackside engineering director Andrew Shovlin confirming the upgrades introduced in Austin are the last planned changes for the W15. "We've brought pretty much everything we're going to bring to the end of the year now," he told media, including PlanetF1.com in Austin. That's not to say that in amongst the learning that you get across the races, we won't be making further changes, but there are no major updates planned for us from here on in. The upgrades coincided with a difficult weekend for Mercedes, with both George Russell and Lewis Hamilton having costly spins, Russell sliding off in qualifying and Hamilton spinning off at the same corner early in the race. The snappy behavior of the Mercedes was evident, with the rear of the car proving tricky to control throughout the weekend, but the upgrades aren't suspected to be the cause of the instability. Opening up on the floor design, Shovlin confirmed the team had introduced a new design and abandoned the concept introduced at Spa for matters of practicality. "This is a new floor. We rolled back on the update, the Spa one, for the last 2 races," he said. Partly because once you get into the long-haul freight covering 2 different specs, it gets very expensive because you're flying floors in enormous boxes. So the reason that we sort of made a decision and stuck with it was largely down to freight costs more than anything else. As for whether the new floor is continuing down the path of the intentions from the Spa floor, or taking the development in a new direction, Chauvelin said, "It's not a fundamentally different concept. It's an evolution of that floor from Spa. It's not the only change on the car. Hopefully, it'll be a big enough step that the performance will be obvious. But we'll see, learn what we can about it." With the new floor being an evolution of the Spa idea, is it a case of Mercedes taking corrective steps to rectify the reasons for deciding against its use? No, because in the wind tunnel, they've just been continuing down and down a development path, he said. With the requirements of the different circuits, there are underlying characteristics of our car that are hurting us on some of those street tracks like Baku and Singapore, where you've got those 90-degree corners. We struggle a bit, particularly in the race with those type of corners. A lot of that is our challenge. It's not really down to what we've been doing in the wind tunnel development, but for the area dynamicists, they've just been continually working, and the packages are just set at a defined point in time where you commit it to carbon. But from their point of view, the thing's changing every single day. Jenson Button has told Christian Horner that he was frustrated watching Max Verstappen's off-track defending as he ran them both off the track in Austin. But while Horner argued that the rules are the rules, the 2009 world champion says F1 needs better rules that prevent drivers from pushing a rival off the track. Verstappen played Formula One's rules perfectly at the United States Grand Prix, as he used the more lenient let them race policy to attack Lando Norris at turn 1 on the opening lap, pushing the McLaren driver off the track. The rulebook was again in play on lap 52 when Norris tried to pass Verstappen around the outside at turn 12. Getting a run on the Red Bull driver, telemetry shows that Norris had overtaken Verstappen meters before turn 12 only for the Dutchman to brake very late to be the one ahead at the apex. That meant he had the right to the corner, and even though he ran both himself and Norris off the track as he wasn't able to make the corner, he had the right to stay ahead. Norris, though, kept his foot down in the runoff area and returned to the track ahead of Verstappen and refused to give the position back. He was slapped with a 5-second penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. Red Bull team boss Horner told Sky pundit Button that's the rule. "It was hard racing between them," said Horner. "They've gone off the circuit and Lando passed off the circuit. The rules are very, very clear." Max was obviously straight on the radio. The race director was pretty clear. "You can see that he went out of track and clearly off the circuit." Button replied, "Well, both guys went off the circuit." Horner responded to that, "Well, you can't overtake." "It's frustrating for us watching," Button told the team boss, "because Lando overtook him off the track, but then Max went off the track, and it's all about who's in front at the apex." Max was in front, but is that because he let off the brake in the apex so he ran them both off track? It seems your driver is very good at understanding the regulations, and it's more of the problem that we need better regulation of what is okay and what isn't. We saw it with many fights on the track at that corner. Guys overtaking, putting it down the inside, and then just driving the other guy off the track. If it was Monaco, they wouldn't do that. We need a rule that you cannot push another car completely off the track, and then I think we would have some better racing and we wouldn't have to keep talking about this. But while Horner understands the frustration, the Briton insisted, "At the end of the day, the rules are the rules. The drivers know that and they're driving accordingly." Max was acutely aware that as soon as Lando went over that white line, off track and overtook, that's illegal. He was straight on the radio. I think before that there were some track limits as well, so there was a whole bunch of things going on at that point in time. Although Verstappen crossed the line behind Norris 4.1s down, the penalty to Norris meant he claimed third place and walked away from a Grand Prix weekend, having outscored Norris for the first time in 5 races to extend his advantage in the drivers' standings to 57 points. Horner was surprised Norris didn't give the position back, as he believes the McLaren had the pace to attack again in the final few laps. "I think with the hindsight of what we've seen the way that these things play out, yes, I would have," he said about giving the position back. You could see the pace advantage that Lando had, and there was always going to be doubts about that. And for us, it looked like a slam dunk. So, why take the risk? To have that pace advantage, could have quite easy get another lap, and he could have probably done it again up the inside rather than the outside. He thought Norris was going to do it at turn 1 only to stay ahead. They all got tangled up at turn 1, so it looked like he was about to let him pass. It was very unusual what happened up there, he added. Ferrari team boss Fred Vasseur says the Scuderia still don't know why Carlos Sainz briefly smelled fuel in the cockpit of his SF24 in the early laps of the United States Grand Prix. But whatever caused the strange problem, it disappeared after a few corners, and he was back up to speed before going on to finish second behind teammate Charles Leclerc. Although Sainz lined up third on the Austin grid with Leclerc behind him, it was the Monegasque driver who made the better start as he pounced on Max Verstappen and Lando Norris's off-track antics to lead the race. Sainz slotted into third behind Verstappen with Norris P4, but the Spaniard suffered car troubles as he reported that he had no power on the exit of the corners, before worryingly adding that, "It smells a lot like fuel in the car, guys." Whatever the issue was, it cleared up by itself and Sainz was back up to speed, but by then he'd lost the DRS to Verstappen ahead and believes that cost him a shot at the victory. "I had some sort of issue that meant that I had very little power at the exit of the corners," he told media, including PlanetF1.com, in the post-race press conference. "That made me lose a couple of seconds, and most importantly, the DRS with Max. And then you are in that 1.5 2-second, 3-second gap. That is the worst for tires and car balance, which meant I just had to settle until the pit stop windows." Pitting 4 laps before Verstappen, Sainz was able to get the undercut on the Red Bull driver to make it a Ferrari 1-2 behind Leclerc. "We managed to get the undercut," he explained. "We boxed really early for that hard tire, but from then on, I felt really comfortable, very confident, and we were very quick again. So a bit gutted that we were so quick all weekend and we obviously didn't end up getting the win." But at the same time, Charles did a great job and a great start to put himself in the position to win it. Vasseur was asked about Sainz's issue during his post-race briefing, but didn't seem to be too worried about it. "He smelled fuel in the car," the team boss told the media, including PlanetF1.com. "It was strange. But we didn't see something here on the data, but he came back after 3 or 4 corners and it came back normal, but I don't know." But while the power issue cost Sainz, he concedes that not being able to pass Verstappen in the opening few laps when Leclerc was already dropping the Red Bull meant he did not really have a chance at beating his teammate to the win. "If I'm honest with you," he continued, "as soon as I saw Charles in P1, then I saw that Max couldn't keep up with Charles. I knew that if I couldn't pass Max in the first 3 laps, it was going to be game over because then Charles and I were always very close in pace. Maybe there's one race or two where he's 1 or 2 tenths quicker in race day, another race where I'm maybe a bit quicker. It just means that track position around any Formula 1 track is key. And after that start, and especially having a car in between us and not being able to pass Max within the first 5 laps, I knew it was going to be very, very tough. Then honestly, with a hard tire, yes, I caught back sometime, but I was just more pushing to see my pace and to see how good I was feeling this weekend, because I was enjoying a lot driving the car this weekend, and I knew I was quick." Ferrari slashed their deficit to Red Bull to just 8 points with the 1-2 result, while McLaren continued to lead the Constructors' Championship with 544 points, 40 ahead of Red Bull and 48 up on Ferrari. Yuki Tsunoda is currently making an effort to showcase his abilities and earn a place in the coveted Red Bull team. Following Liam Lawson's entry into the team, Tsunoda emphasized that he recognizes the need to elevate his performance in order to compete effectively for a spot on the team. Even though Tsunoda has already secured a contract for another year with VCARB, he has been quite candid about his aspirations to move up to the senior Red Bull team if an opportunity arises. The future of Lawson remains uncertain for the Formula 1 2025 season, yet if Lawson performs well during this campaign alongside Tsunoda, it seems likely that he will be the preferred choice to join him at VCARB next season. There have been ongoing discussions and rumors suggesting that Tsunoda could also be considered for a seat in the Red Bull team, especially if Sergio Perez does not show improvement in his performances next to Max Verstappen. It's important to note, however, that Tsunoda himself has expressed his desire to be a driver who is in contention for such promotions when they arise. Nonetheless, Perez is contracted to remain with Red Bull until 2026, which complicates that possibility. With the added experience he has gained in Formula 1, Tsunoda stated that he is aiming to take that crucial next step in his career, especially with Lawson by his side as they both approach the conclusion of his 4th season in the sport. During a media interaction, Tsunoda responded to a question about how changes in teammates influence his mental approach. He remarked that his current mindset remains largely unchanged. However, he acknowledged the need to improve now that Lawson is on the team, saying, "I think I need to also step up as a driver, becoming a more complete driver and taking on more responsibility in terms of leadership. I've been actively working on this. As the United States Grand Prix weekend approached, Lawson was aware that he would be starting at the back of the grid. This was due to a significant alteration to his power unit, which would soon be implemented for the V-Carb vehicle. During qualifying, Lawson was utilized in Q2 to provide Tsunoda with a slipstream, but Tsunoda had some concerns regarding Lawson's movements on the track, particularly about him driving onto a part of the circuit that could potentially cover his tires in dust. Fortunately, those worries were alleviated later, and Tsunoda took the time to commend Lawson for his efforts during the qualifying session. "He did a very good job," Tsunoda said, referring to Lawson's performance. "We didn't really have a precise discussion beforehand about how he was going to offer the slipstream, but during the first attempt, he was probably more cautious about disturbing me going into turn 12, so he seemed to want to stay as far left as possible." However, Tsunoda noted that during their second attempt, Lawson made the necessary adjustments perfectly, which greatly helped him in the session. "So yeah, he did a very good job," Tsunoda concluded, appreciating Lawson's contributions to his qualifying performance. Ferrari's dominance of the United States Grand Prix came on a weekend when it stood out from its rivals in not bringing any upgrades. Or, to be more accurate, none that it officially declared. With closest challengers McLaren, Red Bull, and Mercedes all introducing developments at the Austin track, the FIA's official submission sheet that details changes showed no tweaks to the Ferrari car. But that does not tell the true story of Ferrari's approach to the USA weekend, as there are certain tweaks teams can make that do not have to be declared. Article 19.1c of F1's sporting regulations, which covers what items teams have to tell the FIA about, states that this includes all major aerodynamic and bodywork components and assemblies that have not been run at a previous competition or TCC test and are intended to be run at the competition. Indeed, after seeing Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz take a 1-2 finish, Ferrari team principal Fred Vasseur repeated several times that just because no upgrades were declared, it did not mean the prancing horse did not have any. "It is not that because we are not declaring something that we are not bringing something," he said. "We have to be clear that the upgrades are about the external shape." Ferrari did not elaborate on what exactly was new for Austin, but speculation has surrounded the possibility that it brought some new specification front wings. While these externally are identical to what it first introduced in Singapore, insiders suggest Ferrari had spent some time since the last race working on optimizing their construction to help exploit aeroelasticity more. In a season when having a more flexible front wing has been instrumental in better balancing a car, helping address the low-speed understeer and high-speed oversteer characteristics of the current ground effect machinery, Ferrari had perhaps been too cautious at the start of the season. And while it privately felt that others were pushing the boundaries too much and how much flexing was going on, recent FIA clarifications that such behavior is allowed opened the door for Maranello to go down this route itself now too. A more optimized flexi-wing is not something that will transform a car, but in a season where the gaps between teams are so close, it is a detail that can have an impact. Speaking about the value of a good flexi front wing after what we saw in Austin, Vasseur said, "Clearly it is not a game changer, but we are in the situation today that every single hundredth of a second is making a difference. In qualifying, we had 2 or 3 cars behind us by less than 1/10, and that meant if these details or another one are down to the hundredths of a second, then we have to do it." The new wing design that originally appeared in Singapore is an evolution of its predecessor, with many of the design features retained, albeit more deliberate in their approach. In terms of the actual design changes to the wing, aside from the obvious flap geometry changes, the design of the spoon-shaped transition from the center of the main plane has been altered. This will, in turn, provide a different aerodynamic reaction from the nose assembly. Meanwhile, the outboard section of the flaps has been redesigned where they mate with the end plate. This is in order to enhance the outwash effect being generated and alter the wake generated by the wheel and tire assembly behind. The new flap tips are much more roundly curved, left image above, and the supporting metal work that had previously been employed has been cast aside, which will alter their dynamic behavior as a consequence. Ferrari is also undoubtedly benefiting from a wing designed with a greater ability to exploit aeroelasticity, given the FIA's clearance of solutions fielded by its rivals in recent races. That's it for this video. I'll see you around.